I'm a longtime shoe guy who now introduces himself as a storyteller. But in truth, I've always been a storyteller, even if there were times in my life when I told horrible stories. What does that look like? If you look at my LinkedIn for the past decade and a half, you most likely think of me as a shoe guy. Not a sneakerhead, but someone passionate about finding the right fit for people's unique needs. Someone who believed the right shoe could change your life. For a long time, I believed right meant structured, padded, orthotically engineered. I told a story shaped by conventional wisdom, a story about support, correction, and control. It made sense, especially to someone like me who had survived 8 significant knee injuries and had 2 knee surgeries. I didn't just believe in support, I depended on it. But then something happened that shifted everything I thought I knew. I was walking through a trade show with my then 12-year-old. We were wandering the aisles when all of a sudden my kid shouted, "A spinner!" and bolted towards the booth, eager to win a prize. The folks behind the table lit up at the enthusiasm, and I wandered over to join them. That's when the guy at the booth picked up a shoe, if you could even call it that. He bent it, folded it, twisted it in ways that made my knees ache just watching. And I thought, there is no way that would ever work for me. I needed cushion, structure, arch support. Or so I believed. But they were kind to my kid. They laughed and engaged and said, "Guess who just won a free pair of shoes? You'll have to come by our office, as we don't carry any youth sizes here." So we did. And that day changed everything. My kid got shoes. I got shoes. And as I began to wear them, I realized something unsettling. My entire understanding of footwear was wrong. These shoes didn't impose a shape, but let my foot shape the shoe. They let me feel the ground. As time went on, I learned that just walking in these shoes made my feet stronger, and that strength let me trust my own body again. Not despite the injuries, but because of them. Soon, barefoot shoes were all I wore, and 11 months after putting them on for the first time, I ran a 50K Spartan Ultra in a pair. Afterwards, I had no joint pain or discomfort of any kind. Now, a week later, when I had to wear traditional dress shoes for a few hours, my whole body felt disjoined. But after 50K and 60 obstacles, it was only my muscles that ached. No wonder I became a barefoot enthusiast. In fact, I went on to work for the very company that handed my kid that free pair, Zero Shoes. For much of the last 4 years, I've traveled the country helping others discover what I did. That most shoes, like most stories we inherit, are unnecessarily restrictive. They confine rather than support. They mold us into shapes we were never meant to hold. They devolve our feet, robbing our joints, muscles, and tendons the opportunity to operate as nature intended. But barefoot shoes, they invite expansion. They invite return. They let the body do what it was always meant to do. That's how I learned to tell a life-giving story about shoes. But my journey of unlearning didn't actually start with shoes. It began years earlier. Before I was a shoe guy, I was a pastor. And just like I once had to unlearn everything I thought I knew about footwear, I had to unlearn what I thought I knew about God. Largely because what I thought about God what I thought I knew, failed to form me into the kind of person who lived with the compassion, grace, and love that faith should produce. The faith I knew left me riddled with shame. It didn't undermine shame, it amplified it, stoked it, stirred it. It intensified shame by focusing relentlessly on my depravity, then offered a gentle and almost dismissive reprieve by saying that I was forgiven. This theology believed good news could only be good news if there was really bad news first. And so it thrust the bad news upon me with fervor. So I did what shame-riddled people do. I lied. I deceived. I found secret ways to soothe my shame and actually became the depraved person that faith insisted I had always been. So after spending 40 years of my life immersed in a very Western Christendom understanding of faith, I've come to believe that just like all the scientific evidence pushes us towards barefoot shoes, the scriptural, historical, and embodied evidence points not to a distant deity demanding sacrifice, but a loved-soaked presence inviting trust. Not a Savior who came to change God's mind about me, but one who came to change my mind about God. A God not obsessed with control, but committed to communion. Not defined by wrath, but known by relentless love. The God I thought demanded performance and perfection was actually the one bending down, like that guy at the shoe booth, showing me a different way, a softer, more grounded way, one that didn't add layers of protection and distance, but invited presence, sensation, vulnerability. When I think back to these moments today, I can't help but think of an ancient prophet named Jeremiah who wrote, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." This isn't just spiritual poetry. It's an invitation to question the pathways we've accepted and rediscover more human ways of being. They're moments that invite us to tell a different story. And that's the thing about stories. They shape us more than we know, and when we change them, they change everything about us and the way we move through the world. Now, some might hear all this talk about changing our stories and think I'm advocating for some kind of shallow positive thinking, just slapping a happy face on difficult realities, or worse, using narrative as a way to deny accountability or hard truths. That's not what this is about. Restoring isn't denial, it's deeper seeing. It's not about ignoring reality, but about recognizing that multiple interpretations of reality are always available to us. Some interpretations lead to life, while others lead to diminishment. It's excavation work, and it happens in 3 movements. First, there is a recognition, a naming of the stories you've inherited. Then you have resistance, a questioning of whose interests they serve. Finally, there's reclamation, where you delve into a wisdom held deep within your bones and psyche, a perennial wisdom, an enduring, cross-cultural understanding of what it means to be human, to be fully human. This is a wisdom that transcends time and place, offering guidance on how to live with authenticity, connection, and meaning. That wisdom invites us to stories that reconnect us to the truth that we are not machines, not products, not projects. We are humans, sacred, messy, luminous, loved. And every time we tell a story that leads us back to that truth, we resist the world that wants us to forget. That's the power of story. It's not just memory or meaning, it's direction. It shapes who we become. And it's important that this wisdom we uncover is more than our deepest desires. After all, this can't just be about personal transformation or getting what we want. This is about transforming the very systems that shape our collective lives. Consider the story of the American dream. What began as a vision of collective possibility, where a society created conditions for all to thrive. And it's now a narrative of individual accomplishment. This shift didn't happen by accident. It was a deliberate restoring that served certain interests while obscuring others. The American dream once spoke of shared prosperity, of rising together. But over decades, it was rewritten to celebrate exceptional individuals who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, a phrase that originally meant something impossible. This individualized version of the dream obscures communities, policies, and shared infrastructure that make flourishing possible. It makes invisible the redlining, segregation, and systemic barriers that kept certain communities from accessing that dream at all. This isn't just semantics, it's how power operates. When we internalize stories that frame success and failure as purely individual outcomes, we become less likely to recognize systemic injustice, less likely to organize collectively, and more likely to blame ourselves or others for structural problems. Restoring, then, isn't just personal work, it's political imagination. When we collectively challenge dominant narratives, we are participating in what Adrienne Marie Brown calls emergent strategy, where we create new patterns that ripple outward, transforming both consciousness and conditions. So when I talk about changing our stories, I'm talking about examining the narratives we've unconsciously adopted and asking whether they're actually true, whether they serve life, whether they recognize the complexity of being human. There couldn't be anything further from putting on rose-colored glasses. Quite the opposite. It's about removing the distorted lenses we didn't know we were wearing. It's about finding a clearer vision that honors both suffering and possibility, limitation and liberation. And nowhere is this more true than when it comes to seeing the stories of people who don't look like us. As a straight white guy, it would be easy for me to believe that the way the world treats me is the way it treats everyone. That my experience is universal, that it represents the normal human experience. This is perhaps privilege's most insidious effect. It normalizes itself through storytelling. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man who lost his life challenging Hitler's Nazi Germany, understood this when he wrote about seeing the great events of world history from below, from the perspective of the outcast, the suspects, the maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed, the reviled. This isn't just a moral imperative, it's a recognition that the stories told from positions of power are inherently incomplete. Restoring requires those with privilege to recognize that we've inherited narratives that naturalize inequality. Stories that tell us success comes from merit alone. Stories that normalize racial wealth gaps or gender pay disparities as the way things are. Stories that render the marginalized invisible or frame them as problems to be solved rather than voices to be centered. This is where restoring becomes not just healing work, but justice work. By questioning whose stories get told, whose get believed, and whose get institutionalized, we create space for narratives that honor the full humanity of all people, not just those with power to shape dominant cultural stories. Having my eyes open to this reality is another layer to my restoring journey. During my sophomore year of undergrad, I was assigned a book on educational disparities in inner city schools. The sections about East St. Louis described conditions so devastating that I dismissed them as propaganda. Nothing, I thought, could possibly be that bad in America. The descriptions of crumbling schools, environmental hazards, and systemic abandonment were so far beyond my cultural experience that I couldn't imagine them as being real. I remember closing that book, thinking it was exaggerated to make a political point. Fast forward about 10 years to my first year at seminary, I was assigned to a church in East St. Louis. And suddenly, I was walking through the very reality I had once dismissed as impossible. The conditions weren't propaganda. They were the way of someone else's daily life. Streets where children played alongside environmental waste, schools with broken windows and inadequate resources, communities systemically cut off from opportunity by redlining, disinvestment, and infrastructure designed to isolate rather than connect. That moment forced me to recognize a profound truth. The stories I believed about America did not apply to all Americans. The narratives I had inherited of equal opportunity, of systems that worked for everyone, of problems that couldn't really be that bad, was a story that served those already comfortable while making invisible those who weren't. What was most unsettling wasn't just seeing the conditions, but recognizing how easily I had dismissed someone else's reality because it didn't match my story. How completely my privilege had allowed me to simply not believe what didn't fit in my worldview. The discomfort of that experience was palpable, and it was one of the many moments that forced me to consider how my story affected others, be it something systemic or more personal. And here's something crucial. Whether we're talking about the broad impact of dehumanizing structures or the effects of our own struggles on those closest to us, we must take full accountability for the actions we took while believing false stories. Changing our narrative doesn't erase the impact of our choices. If anything, a more truthful story allows us to face our impact with greater clarity and courage. This is where the wisdom of recovery communities offers profound guidance. The life of making amends isn't just about saying sorry, rather it's about living differently in ways that help heal the wounds we created. It's about allowing our new story to generate new actions that restore what was broken. In this way, accountability becomes not just a burden of the past, but a pathway toward healing for ourselves and others. When we own both our stories and their consequences, we discover that responsibility and freedom aren't opposites. They're companions on the journey toward becoming more fully human. So let me ask you something. What story are you telling yourself right now? What story are you living? And is it making you more human or less? If that question stirs something in you, good. That's the beginning. That's the moment where you can get to become the storyteller of your own life. Not the editor cutting out all the bad parts, not the director trying to control the outcome, just the teller. The one who names what's true and invites something new. My story, from restrictive shoes to barefoot freedom, from confining theology to liberating faith, from ignorance about systemic realities to an advocate for change, is what led me to create We Can Stay Human. Just as I found freedom in letting my feet reconnect with the earth, just as I discovered that embracing a more authentic faith invited me to live with empathy, compassion, and kindness, just as walking the streets of East St. Louis opened my eyes to harsh realities, We Can Stay Human invites you to explore the stories that seek to rob us of our humanity and craft more life-giving alternatives. We'll draw wisdom from diverse traditions, examine how systems shape our personal narratives, and practice writing new stories that honor our full humanity, not just as individuals, but as people connected to each other and to the living world around us. Because storytelling isn't just art, it's ecology, it's resistance. It's how we stay human in a world constantly trying to make us something less. Pulling from that deeper perennial wisdom, these stories will center on 4 movements. From shame transformed into embrace, from performance giving way to authenticity, from exploration disrupted by solidarity, from consumption being replaced with the recreation of creativity, connection, and rest. But more than anything, this is a space that invites you to explore your own story. If this resonates with you, I invite you to join us on this journey by subscribing to receive weekly reflections at wecanstayhuman.com. If you want to go a step further, a $5 subscription will give you access to 3 weekly practices, a 60-second guided reclamation that anyone can work into their schedule, a 60-minute resistance ritual that invites you to dive deeper into your own story, or ideas on how you can step into a full-on rebellion transforming all of your life. And since this story is best explored in community, I encourage you to share this post with someone who it might resonate, whose story needs rewriting. Your story doesn't belong to the systems that try to define you. It belongs to you. And we're here to help you reclaim it. Whether you start big or small, these shifts are how we can stay human.